"You're not even real family," my daughter-in-law said, handing me a paper plate at my own Thanksgiving table. I didn't argue, I smiled, and kept carving the turkey I'd paid for. By Christmas, I'd uncover the forged documents she thought I'd never notice. And by spring, my son would be choosing lawyers while I chose freedom. They planned to erase me quietly. They forgot I still owned the pen. We're just getting started. But before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? These stories aren't just mine, they're mirrors. Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe in second chances, hit subscribe. The paper plate bent beneath Eleanor's fingers, but Jane's words cut deeper than the carving knife. The smell of roasted garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen as Eleanor stood at the stove, lifting the lid of the gravy pot just enough to stir. Everything was ready. Turkey resting, sides warming in the oven. Her mother's china already set on the table with polished silver. She'd started preparing at dawn. Every year, no matter who came, she made it beautiful. The door creaked open. "Hi, Grandma." Hannah's voice rang out as she ran into the kitchen, puffy coat half-zipped, arms already outstretched. Eleanor crouched and hugged her tightly, inhaling the faint smell of cotton candy shampoo. "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart." Ben darted past without a word, already looking for the remote. Then Jane stepped in. Her heels tapped crisply across the hardwood. A folded designer coat dangled perfectly over one arm, lipstick flawless. Smile sharper than it needed to be. John followed behind, already scrolling on his phone. Jane didn't offer a hug, just handed over a stack of flimsy gold-trimmed paper plate. "I figured we'd keep it casual this year," she said, her tone breezy. No point in dragging out the good china. She held Eleanor's gaze just long enough before adding, lightly, "You're not even real family anyway." The plate sagged slightly in Eleanor's hand. She said nothing. She didn't trust herself to speak. Jane turned away, already shouting after the kids. Eleanor stood motionless, warmth from the oven brushing against her back while cold settled in her chest. The house she'd hosted 30 Thanksgivings in suddenly felt like a stage someone else had taken over. John lingered a step behind. "It's just Jane's way," he mumbled, eyes still on his screen. "Don't take it personally." Then he walked off, leaving Eleanor standing in her own entryway with paper plates in one hand and silence in the other. Back in the kitchen, she placed the stack carefully on the counter. Her hands moved without direction, checking rolls, wiping non-existent crumbs, straightening placemats already straight. She opened the drawer, pulled out her phone, and typed, "To Ruth. It's happening again." Ruth's reply came instantly. "Ruth, do you want me to come over?" Eleanor stared at the message. Did she? No, she didn't want a witness. Not yet. Eleanor, not yet. Just needed to say it out loud. She put the phone down and returned to the food. Her movements grew sharper. The mashed potatoes were fluffed to perfection, the stuffing garnished with fresh parsley. She didn't use the paper plates. She plated every dish with care, placing the china on the table like a final act of defiance. When she called them to dinner, no one helped her carry the food. No one commented on how everything looked. Jane sipped wine like she owned the place. The kids bickered over who got the drumstick. John barely spoke. Eleanor served them all with steady hands and an expression she'd perfected over the years, pleasant, unreadable. At the far end of the table, Jane threw her head back in a laugh at something Hannah said. Her voice rang out, light and bright, a sound that didn't belong to someone who had just called her host expendable. Eleanor sat down last, folding her napkin carefully in her lap. She didn't touch her food. Her phone buzzed on the counter behind her. "Ruth, if it's starting again, maybe this time, don't let it finish the same way." Eleanor didn't respond. Her eyes stayed fixed on Jane, glowing at the center of the table like she was the one who had built it all. She hadn't. Eleanor had, and now she wasn't even sure she had a place at it anymore. Eleanor watched Jane laugh with the kids, comfortable, glowing, untouchable, and knew without flinching that she was a stranger in her own home. The plate broke in her hands, but Eleanor's silence was more powerful than the cracks. She hadn't even noticed the tension in her grip until she heard it. A soft snap. Then the dull clink of ceramic falling in uneven pieces onto the tile. One of the fine dessert plates, ivory porcelain, gold-rimmed, a wedding gift from her mother-in-law. She stared at the fragments in her palm, one sharp edge catching the light, and for a long moment, she felt nothing at all. Then her hands began to tremble. She knelt slowly, gathering the shards, placing them in a napkin like she was tucking in a child for bed. Her fingers moved deliberately, methodically, like if she moved too fast, the rest of her might break too. Behind her, the sounds of dinner went on. Laughter, clinking glasses, Jane's voice rising above the rest, bright and performative. Eleanor stood and reached for the sink. She rinsed her hands under cold water and gripped the edge of the counter. Breathe in, hold, exhale. Again, her phone buzzed against the granite. Ruth, incoming call. She let it ring twice before answering, wiping her hand on a dish towel. Hey, you okay? Ruth asked, voice soft and immediate. I'm fine, Eleanor lied, glancing at the broken plate now wrapped in the napkin beside the sink. You texted me. I know. What happened? Eleanor hesitated. Her throat felt tight, like something inside her was pushing upward, trying to escape. I don't want to get into it, she said. It's Thanksgiving. There was a pause. Ruth didn't push. She just said, you don't have to stay quiet, not anymore. Eleanor swallowed hard. I'll call you later. She hung up without waiting for a reply. From the dining room, Jane's voice called out like a command wrapped in courtesy. Mom, did you add sugar to the sweet potatoes again? I thought we weren't doing that this year. Eleanor forced herself forward. She reached for the serving spoon, her jaw set. As she walked back in, Jane turned and raised her eyebrows. I mean, we're not trying to give the kids diabetes, right? Eleanor smiled. Not with her mouth. With her training. She served another scoop onto Ben's plate and said nothing. Jane didn't like that. She glanced at John, nudging him with her elbow. You should ask your mom to try one of those meal kits. It might save her some effort next year. Eleanor looked at John, his fork paused mid-air. He didn't look up. Instead, he said almost to his plate, why don't you let Jane help next time? Eleanor blinked. Excuse me? He lifted his head, eyes mild but distant. I'm just saying, it might be less work for you. A single tear pushed up from somewhere deep and unwanted. She blinked quickly and let it retreat. No one asked me if I needed help, she said, her voice calm, almost clinical. John gave a soft shrug. You always do everything. We figured you wanted to. Eleanor looked around the table. Her food, her linens, her home. Jane sipping her wine, smirking like she'd won something. The children chatting, oblivious. She stood still in the quiet gap that had formed in her head. Her hand curled around the back of the nearest chair. This wasn't new, but it was louder now. Bold and Mark, her younger son, he wasn't even here. He'd texted that morning, Jane's still recovering from a cold, so we'll sit this year out. Give everyone hugs from us. She hadn't replied. Her eyes drifted to the far end of the room, where the hallway led to the back porch. The voices were softer there, muted. Then she heard it. A whisper, just loud enough to carry. She's a burden. Always has been. Jane's voice. Clear. Flat. Eleanor froze in place. Then Mark's voice on speakerphone. Probably, she means well. I don't know what to do anymore. Jane again. You don't have to do anything. She won't fight. She never does. Eleanor's breath caught, not from shock, but from the sudden vivid stillness that filled her. Her silence hadn't protected her. It had erased her. The china, the turkey, the traditions. None of it had been enough. She stared down at the table, now littered with half-finished plates and wine-stained napkins. Jane laughed again from the hallway, casual and cruel, and in that moment, something settled inside Eleanor. Not loud, not raging, just solid, unmoving, ready. She didn't just dismiss me, she dismissed everything I've ever done. Eleanor sat at the edge of her bed, the guest linen still folded beside her. The hallway was silent now. Jane and John had taken the kids to a hotel for space, leaving behind only the faint scent of Jane's perfume and the sharp echo of her words. She's a burden. That sentence kept looping in Eleanor's mind like a broken hymn. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve, remembering Mark's first day of kindergarten. She'd packed his lunch with handwritten notes every week. John's college applications, edited at 2 a.m. while everyone else slept. Christmas mornings, sick days, high school breakups, Jane's bridal shower. Every Thanksgiving table set before sunrise. Eleanor had been the quiet scaffolding beneath them all. But scaffolding isn't meant to be seen, just stood on, and eventually taken down. The next morning, she moved through the kitchen like muscle memory. Coffee brewing, dishes washed, counters wiped. No one noticed. No one ever did. Her phone buzzed. Ruth. Did you sleep? Eleanor, a few hours, the usual. Ruth, don't minimize. Talk to me. She hesitated, then typed. Eleanor. Jane told Mark, I'm a burden. He didn't argue. The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then returned. Ruth, you're not. You never have been. She's threatened by what she didn't build. Eleanor exhaled, rubbing her temples. The words helped, but only a little. Later that day, she dropped off a casserole at her neighbor's and picked up the mail. Catalogs. John. One plain white envelope addressed to her. No return label. She slid it into her pocket without thinking. Back home, she made tea and sat at the kitchen table, alone in the house she had filled with decades of noise. She tried to rest, but her mind kept drifting, like the time Jane rolled her eyes at Eleanor's hand-knit baby blanket for Hannah, swapping it out for something more modern, or the Mother's Day card that never came, or the way Jane had once asked if Eleanor could watch the kids during her own birthday dinner, without a thank you. Every moment small on its own. Together they formed a bruise no one could see. A door creaked. She looked up. Jane, back early, still wearing her trench coat, sunglasses pushed onto her head like a crown. I left my phone charger, she said, glancing around. We'll be heading back to the hotel after lunch. Eleanor gave a small nod, rising from the table. Jane didn't move to leave. Instead, she leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes cool. You look tired, she said, tone wrapped in false concern. Why don't you take a break from hosting? Let someone else handle the next holiday. Eleanor felt the heat rise up her chest, but kept her tone neutral. No one's stopping you. A pause, a twitch of a smile. Jane turned without another word, and walked down the hall. As the door clicked shut behind her, Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out the envelope. Her fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside was a letter, 1 page, cold, impersonal. Notice of appraisal. Your property has been scheduled for valuation. Date December 14, requested by Mark Turner. She read it twice. Mark, her youngest son, had requested an appraisal on her house. Her house. The one she and Tom had paid off together. The house she still lived in. No discussion. No warning. Her hand gripped the edge of the table. It took everything not to rip the letter in two. She picked up her phone and called Ruth. You ready to talk yet? Ruth asked gently. Not yet, Eleanor replied. A long silence passed. But I will be, she added. Her voice sounded different now, not broken, measured, weighted, certain. Eleanor stared at the letter on the table, its edges sharp against the wood, proof that the betrayal wasn't imagined, and that something much bigger was being taken from her. A letter in the mailbox wasn't about taxes. It was about control. Eleanor sat with the envelope flat on the kitchen table, her tea untouched, grown cold. The letter had no warmth either, just official font, a date, a name, Mark Turner, her son, requesting an appraisal on a house that wasn't his. She ran her finger along the page's edge, as if touch could make sense of what her mind refused to settle with. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some bureaucratic glitch. Her son had signed his name to a process that could take her home out from under her, without even a call. She reached for her reading glasses and put them on, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to see every word with absolute clarity. Owner listed, Eleanor May Turner. Appraisal authorized by Mark Turner, family representative. Valuation requested for sale or refinance. Sale or refinance. She blinked once. Then again. The house had been paid off for 8 years. Her hand hovered over her phone for several seconds before she finally called him. Mark answered on the third ring. "Hey Mom, everything okay?" "No," she said, voice steady. "I got a letter today. About the house." A pause. "What kind of letter?" "An appraisal has been scheduled." "Oh, that." Another pause. Jane said, "She mentioned it. Maybe not directly, just, in passing. You've been talking about downsizing for years." "I haven't," she thought. "Well, we thought it might be easier. For you. Less maintenance. Fewer stairs. That sort of thing." Eleanor sat back in her chair, gripping the phone tighter. "And you didn't think I should be part of the decision about my home?" "It's just exploratory," Mark said, sounding annoyed now. "You're overthinking it. Jane's just trying to help." She closed her eyes. That phrase again, as if help came wrapped in silence and signatures. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "Help? Of course." She didn't respond, and in that pause, something between them shifted, small but irreversible. Mark cleared his throat. "Look, I've got a call in a few. Let's talk later, okay?" She ended the call without saying goodbye. That night, sleep didn't come. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows of the ceiling fan stretching across the room, like long arms reaching for things that didn't belong to them. In the morning, she pulled out the fireproof box from the back of the closet, the one she kept for documents she never expected to need again. Deed, mortgage release, tax records, original title, all in her name. Her name. She lined them up on the dining room table like a puzzle, scanning for anything out of place. One envelope caught her eye, not old, but tucked into the back. A copy of a family authorization form with a scanned signature. It was her name. Only it wasn't her handwriting. Not quite. Her stomach dropped. She grabbed the magnifying glass from the drawer, and studied the scrawl. She'd never put loops on her capital E. This one did. She traced the stroke in the air, then opened her checkbook to compare. Her signature was simpler, sharper. This version was trying too hard to match it. Trying. She picked up her phone, and dialed the law office her friend Lorraine worked at. A receptionist answered. "Hi. I need to speak with someone about a potential case of signature fraud," Eleanor said, calm but direct. "What's the context?" the woman asked. "It's about my home, and my name being used without my consent." The woman transferred her within minutes. She had an appointment booked for Monday morning. As she hung up, her hands were steady. She walked back into the kitchen, placed the letter back on the table, and stood there for a moment, staring down at it. It wasn't just a letter. It was a flag. A warning. Jane wasn't just nudging her toward change. She was carving the path herself and dragging Mark along with her. Eleanor walked to the window, the one that faced the backyard. The garden she'd built. The patio Tom had poured himself. The swing set where her grandchildren had once played before Jane declared it an eyesore. All of it hers. She turned from the window, and picked up her phone again. Ruth answered on the first ring. "I'm not ready to talk about feelings," Eleanor said, "but I am ready to talk about lawyers." Ruth let out a breath. Finally. Eleanor nodded, her voice firmer than it had been in weeks. "I'm going to take control of this for once. This time I'm not the one who'll be overlooked." Eleanor sat across from Lorraine's law partner, a young woman named Kristen, who looked barely older than Hannah's third-grade teacher, but her voice was sharp, precise. "This signature was meant to pass a casual glance," Kristen said, turning the printed authorization form slightly under the desk lamp. "But it's not yours. And legally, that matters." Eleanor nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Kristen continued, flipping through the other documents Eleanor had brought. The appraisal notice, mortgage release, title papers, all in Eleanor's name, except the one that wasn't. "You're in a strong position," Kristen said. "But if someone's moving paperwork around behind your back, you'll want documentation of everything. If they're willing to forge a signature, they're willing to move faster than you think." Eleanor left the office with a folder under her arm and steel in her spine. By the time she pulled into her driveway, she already had a list in her head. The filing cabinet in the laundry room, the old desktop she hadn't used since Tom passed, the email account her son Mark had helped her set up, but had quietly linked to the family cloud. She spent the afternoon digging bills, insurance statements, utility records, and then tucked in a file marked medical, An unsigned power of attorney form with a yellow sticky note on it. Get this to Mom to sign. Use the insurance folder excuse, if she hesitates. J. No name, no date. Just a handwritten J. Her stomach turned. It was Jane's handwriting. Loopy. Rushed like it always was when she assumed no one would see it. Eleanor stared at the note until her vision blurred. Then she folded it, placed it in the same legal folder from the morning, and slid it into her desk drawer like loading a chamber. By evening the sun had dropped low against the kitchen windows, casting her countertops in quiet amber. Ruth arrived with a casserole and wine she knew Eleanor wouldn't drink. You're not a ghost in your own life, Ruth said, as they sorted papers into piles, but you're letting them treat you like one. I'm not letting them anymore, Eleanor replied, her voice soft but unswerving. You're building a case, Ruth said, almost to herself. I'm building a boundary, Eleanor corrected. Together they went through old email threads. Eleanor forwarding herself anything Jane or Mark had written that mentioned the house. Eleanor's future or suggestions that she get her paperwork in order. Each message was laced with implication, each one another brick in the quiet wall being built around her until now. Later that night, Eleanor sat at her desk. She pulled out a blank sheet of heavy stationery and began to write. No anger, no begging, just facts. She addressed it to both of them, Mark and Jane, not as family but as people who'd made choices without her. She explained the appraisal, the unauthorized paperwork, the attempt at power of attorney. She listed the attached documents she was enclosing, including the letter now logged at her lawyer's office, and at the bottom she signed it with a firm, steady hand. Eleanor May Turner, owner, 319 Rosewood Lane. No mom, no love you, just identity. She folded the letter carefully, slid it into an envelope with each document, and sealed it shut. Then she walked outside. The air was cool, damp with late fall, leaves sticking to the pavement like whispers no one listened to. She walked to the mailbox at the end of her driveway, her robe fluttering slightly in the wind. She slid the envelope in and paused, just for a breath. It was the kind of pause that had once held hesitation. This time it held resolve. She let the metal door snap shut. Eleanor turned back toward the house, the wind brushing her hair across her cheek, and felt something she hadn't in years: control. I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling. Eleanor waited until they were both seated before entering the room. Mark and Jane sat side by side on the living room sofa, as if this were some routine conversation. Jane wore her usual shade of neutral, smug, legs crossed, arms draped casually, like this wasn't the first time she'd been caught and expected to talk her way through it. Eleanor walked in, calm and precise, the envelope in her hand now open, its contents neatly spread on the coffee table between them. The copy of the forged signature, the appraisal notice, the power of attorney draft with the sticky note Eleanor hadn't yet mentioned. Jane's eyes flicked to the papers and back again, expression unreadable. Mark didn't look up at all. I assume you've read it, Eleanor said. Jane gave a small laugh through her nose. You're being dramatic, Mom. Eleanor didn't flinch. No, I'm being thorough. Mark finally lifted his head. Mom, we just thought you didn't think anything, Eleanor cut in, her voice flat. You let her do the thinking, and then you let her act on it. Quietly. Illegally. Jane shifted. It wasn't illegal. You forged my name on a legal authorization, Eleanor said. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a felony. A silence fell over the room. Eleanor didn't sit. She stayed standing, rooted, steady, centered in her own home for the first time in years. I spoke with a lawyer. She has everything now. And as of this morning, the fraud has been formally documented. Jane's mouth tightened. You're blowing this out of proportion. Am I? Come on, Jane said louder now. We're just trying to help. You're not getting any younger, Eleanor. And this house is too much for one person. You live like you're still in 1985. It's sad. Eleanor took a step forward. What's sad is that you stood in my kitchen, ate my food, sat at my table, and then turned around and tried to erase me. Jane scoffed, but her posture stiffened. This isn't about the house, Eleanor said. It's not about space or stairs or helping. It's about control, about entitlement. Mark cleared his throat. Mom, this doesn't have to be a fight. No, she said. It doesn't, because I'm done fighting. I've already won. Jane's eyes narrowed. You think some lawyer scare tactic is going to stop us from caring about your future? Eleanor tilted her head. You didn't care about my future. You planned it without me. The words landed. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it again. His silence was louder than anything Jane had said. Eleanor walked to the table and picked up the sticky note. She held it out for Jane to see. This, she said, voice quieter now but no less forceful, was taped to a form you never should have had. You coached him into tricking me. You used insurance paperwork as a cover story. Jane blinked. For the first time her confidence flickered. I know your handwriting, Jane. I know how you speak when you think I'm not listening. And I know how you smile when you're lying. Jane stood abruptly. This is petty. No, Eleanor said. It's protective. You're paranoid. I'm prepared. Jane let out a frustrated breath and snatched her purse from the side table. Fine. Do whatever you need to do. But don't come crying when you realize you need us and we're not around. She turned and headed toward the door. Mark stayed seated. Jane turned at the threshold, waiting for him to follow. He didn't move. Mark, he blinked but didn't look at her. She scoffed again. Unbelievable, she muttered, then stormed out, heels clipping fast against the hardwood as the front door slammed behind her. The house fell quiet. Eleanor didn't look at Mark. She didn't ask for his opinion. She didn't need. She walked to the window, arms crossed lightly in front of her, and stared out at the fading light on the lawn. Behind her, Mark still hadn't said a word. He sat motionless on the couch, eyes down, silence hanging heavy, offering nothing, not an apology, not even defense, just absence. He didn't defend her because he didn't have to. The next morning, Mark stood in the doorway of the sunroom, shifting from foot to foot like a man deciding whether to walk in or walk away. Eleanor didn't look up from the seed catalog she'd been pretending to read. He finally spoke. You know you've caused a rift. She closed the catalog slowly. I caused the rift. Mark's jaw clenched. You escalated things, publicly. Jane's humiliated. Eleanor stood and walked past him, into the kitchen, the way she might have 30 years ago when he mouthed off and she needed space, not to raise her voice. He followed. She was trying to protect you. From what? She asked over her shoulder. From staying in my home? From legal ownership of what's mine, she thought. Mark hesitated. We thought you'd feel safer with family helping. Eleanor turned to face him, her expression clean of rage but sharp with clarity. That's not help, that's control. Mark looked at the floor, then up again, as if hoping she might back down first. She's been undermining me for years, Eleanor said. And you let her. He blinked, startled by the flatness of her tone. I'm not trying to take sides. You already did. The words hung there, simple and devastating. He didn't deny it. I never asked you to choose between us, Eleanor added. But you chose anyway. Quietly. Every time you ignored a snide remark. Every time you didn't speak up. Every time you let her speak for you. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want anything from you, she said. That's the problem, isn't it? Mark didn't answer. He looked older in that moment than she remembered, like a man halfway buried in his own compromises. She stepped past him and walked out onto the porch. The morning air was thin, brittle with early December. The swing still creaked slightly in the breeze, though no one had sat on it in years. Behind her, she heard him move toward the door, then stop. Are you really going through with this? He asked. I already have, she said, without turning around. The door creaked shut. Later that day, Eleanor drove to Lorraine's office with a manila folder in her purse and an old ache between her ribs. The betrayal had hardened into resolve, but the grief still lingered, like bone memory. Lorraine met her in the lobby, took one look at Eleanor's face, and guided her into a private conference room. You look like you've been holding something in, Lorraine said gently. Eleanor placed the folder on the table. I want to make sure this doesn't get buried. I want it documented. Archived, filed. I want a paper trail. Jane can't dance around and Mark can't deny. Lorraine raised an eyebrow. And the family? They'll either see it clearly or they won't. Lorraine leaned back. You ready for what that might cost you? Eleanor paused. I'm more afraid of what it's already cost. Lorraine nodded, then added, No more waiting for people to do the right thing. No more asking for permission. Eleanor agreed. This is my life. I'm done watching it happen to me. When she returned home, the house felt still, but not empty. She walked to the dining room and opened her laptop. Years of digital records waited. Emails, bank statements, deed filings, appointment confirmation. She began dragging files into labeled folders, organized, timed, sorted by date and sender. Click, save, print, clip. She printed her own will, made updates, initialed the changes, scanned them again. By evening the table was covered in crisp white stacks. She opened a new spreadsheet and titled it, Turner Family Legal Inventory, Private. She hadn't eaten since morning. But she wasn't hungry, she was preparing. She looked out the window as dusk settled in, the swing still rocking slightly under the wind. Somewhere inside her, sorrow curled its toes, but it didn't move. She opened one last drawer in her desk and retrieved the small voice recorder Tom had once used for field notes when he worked survey routes. She dusted it off, clicked the switch. Her voice was quiet but firm. This is Eleanor May Turner. This is my record of truth. She pressed record again and began listing everything, in her own words finally claiming the story they'd tried to rewrite without her. I'll be heard, not just silenced in the corner. The dining room felt colder than usual, the overhead light casting a clinical glow over the table. Eleanor had once dressed in autumn centerpieces and candlelight. Tonight, there were no place settings, no food, just a neat row of manila folders at the center, one for each. Mark and Jane arrived first. Both wore the same expressions they'd worn to Tom's memorial, tight-lipped and inconvenienced. John followed, late and visibly irritated, as if she'd summoned him for something trivial, like a burned-out light bulb or a forgotten birth. Hannah and Ben stayed in the car. Jane had told them it was grown-up business. Eleanor didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table with her back straight and her voice composed. I want to thank you all for coming. I know it's uncomfortable, but this meeting is necessary, and I'll speak without interruption. Jane gave a quiet scoff but said nothing. Eleanor continued, each of you has a folder. Inside, you'll find documentation, scans, copies, legal letters and timelines. I encourage you to read them carefully. Mark opened his slowly. Jane didn't touch hers. John flipped through his with a mixture of confusion and guilt rising on his face like heat. You've each played a part in recent events, whether actively or through silence. Eleanor said, this isn't about resentment, it's about accountability. Jane rolled her eyes. So this is a trial now? No, Eleanor said calmly, it's a reckoning. I don't know why you're doing this, Jane said, forcing a laugh. You're turning this into some dramatic courtroom fantasy. It's a family disagreement, not fraud. I have a lawyer who disagrees, Eleanor replied. That landed. Jane's smile faltered. Mark remained quiet, jaw tense, hands in his lap. His folder sat untouched. Eleanor stepped forward. Jane, you forged my signature. You tried to file a power of attorney without my consent. You used my son's name to authorize a home appraisal I didn't ask for. You coached him on how to deceive me. That's not true, Jane snapped. You're twisting. You left a note, Eleanor said, lifting it from her own folder and reading it aloud. Get this to Mom to sign. Use the insurance folder excuse if she hesitates. That's your handwriting. Don't insult me further by denying it. Jane flushed crimson, her mouth opening, then closing. Eleanor turned her gaze to Mark. I need to hear from you. Did you know? Mark looked up at her, then away. I didn't read everything. She said it was just paperwork. Health-related. You didn't question it, Eleanor asked. I trusted her. Eleanor nodded slowly, her eyes softening. Just for a moment, John leaned forward, flipping through more pages. Jesus, why didn't you tell us sooner? Because I hoped someone would notice, she said, her voice tight. Someone would speak up before it came to this. Jane stood. You've made your point. You're angry. You've embarrassed us. Congratulations. Eleanor stayed still. I'm not angry. I'm reclaiming what's mine. This is about the house? No, Eleanor said, firm now. It's not about the house. It's about the erasure of who I am, what I've done, what I've built. Jane turned to Mark. Say something. Mark stood slowly. His eyes didn't meet Eleanor. If you can't let this go, he said quietly, we're leaving. For good. The words didn't fall like a threat. They fell like a decision already made. Eleanor felt her chest rise. But it wasn't grief that followed. It wasn't fear. It was release. I won't stop, she said. If you walk away, that's on you. Mark didn't respond. Jane reached for her coat. John sat silently, staring down at the final page in the folder, his fingers unmoving. No one said another word. As they filed out, Mark leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. You could have just stayed quiet. Eleanor didn't flinch. That's exactly what I stopped doing. If they want to leave, they can. I'm no longer the doormat. The guest bedroom door was open when Eleanor passed by that morning. Empty suitcases lay on the bed, half filled with folded clothes and zippered bags. Jane's beige trench coat hung over a chair like it had never been worn. Mark's laptop was gone from the nightstand. She paused in the doorway, then kept walking. There was no announcement, no final conversation, just the sound of dresser drawers closing and a suitcase rolling across hardwood. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't offer to help. The front door clicked shut mid-afternoon. They didn't leave enough. For the first time in years, the silence in her house didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like space. Later she stood at the kitchen window, with a cup of tea, watching the wind lift the last few dry leaves from the lawn. For years, she had been trimming herself down to fit biting back, saying less, staying quiet in rooms where she used to lead. That version of her had been hollowed out slowly, bit by bit, until nothing remained but patience, and a chair in the corner no one offered her a voice from. And now, she walked to her desk and opened the folder Lorraine had given her, finalized documents confirming her full legal protection over the home. Everything notarized, filed and archived. Her name sat alone on the deed again, bold and unchallenged. There would be no more exploratory appraisals, no unauthorized signatures, no forged paperwork stuffed into mailboxes. She called Lorraine. Everything's secure, Eleanor said. Legally, emotionally, spiritually. I love when you speak in complete chapters, Lorraine replied. Now what? Eleanor looked around at the house, still too big, still too filled with echoes and ghosts. I'm thinking of selling, she said. Lorraine didn't ask why, she didn't need to. The real estate agent arrived the next day. A sharp, thoughtful woman named Dana, who wore her hair in a sleek twist and carried a leather folio that snapped shut with confidence. Eleanor gave her the tour, each room explained with precise, factual pride. The sunroom Tom had built, the swing in the backyard, the crown molding she'd painted by hand after his stroke. Her voice didn't crack once. When they finished, Dana walked to the dining room window and said, "This place has character. That's not something developers usually say, but one of our buyers specializes in preserving original homes. She's made it clear she's not looking to gut anything. She wants it as is." She said it felt lived in. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. That's not a phrase people usually like. Dana smiled. It means it holds a story, and she wants to protect that. It was the first time someone had spoken of the house, the way Eleanor had always hoped someone would speak of her. They stood in silence for a moment. I'll review the offer, Eleanor said, finally. But tell her, I won't sell to someone looking for land. She needs to want the. I already told her, Dana said, and she still wants it. That night, Eleanor stood on the back porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching the moon climb high over the skeletal trees. She thought of all the years she had measured her life through service. Birthdays remembered, holidays hosted, forgiveness given without being asked for. And now she was measuring by something new. Boundaries drawn, documents signed, decisions made without permission. She didn't know where she would go next, but she knew she wouldn't be asking anyone for approval when she got there. Her phone stayed silent. Mark hadn't called, neither had Jane. And this time, Eleanor didn't check twice. She stood at the threshold of her own back door, house secured, deal in motion, knowing they hadn't spoken a word to her since they walked out, and realizing with startling calm, she didn't miss them. They expected silence from me, but I found my voice. The contract lay on the kitchen counter, 12 pages of legalese, distilled into one clean line of truth. The home at 319 Rosewood Lane will transfer to the buyer as is. No renovations, no condition, no family consent required. Eleanor held the pen in her hand and paused. not out of hesitation but out of ritual. This was the last line she would sign in this house, not as someone being moved, as someone moving herself. She signed slowly, carefully, each stroke deliberate. The pen clicked shut with a satisfying finality. She folded the documents, slid them into the envelope Dana had provided, and sealed it with her thumb. The tape hissed against the paper like a quiet exhale. The knock came an hour later. She didn't need to check the window. She already knew. She opened the door to find Mark standing beside Jane, both in winter coats, as if they'd come prepared for bad weather. Eleanor stepped back, not as an invitation but as a boundary. Mark glanced around the house, like it might look different now that it was leaving the family. We heard about the sale. I'm sure you did, Eleanor replied, folding her hands calmly in front of her. We just wanted to understand, he added. It's so sudden. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Is it? You both walked out, and didn't look back. Jane took a step forward. Eleanor, you've made your point, you've punished us. But this house, this family can still be fixed. It's not punishment, Eleanor said. It's peace. Jane tilted her head, expression brittle. You've had a difficult year. I get it, but think about what you're giving up. Your grandchildren, the traditions, the roots. Eleanor nodded. I have thought about it. Every day, every birthday I spent alone while you took over the guest list. Every holiday where you made me the help, instead of the host. I was the roots. You just built your life on top of them. Mark shifted uncomfortably. You don't have to do this, Mom. Eleanor looked at him carefully. Why couldn't she ever appreciate what I've done for this family? Jane scoffed. That's not fair. No, Eleanor said, her voice level. Fair would have been being treated like family instead of furniture. Jane opened her mouth, then hesitated. Her eyes flicked to Mark, hoping maybe he would come to her defense. But he didn't. Eleanor could feel the balance shift then. Something subtle but unmistakable. Jane's hold weakening. Mark's silence, less about neutrality, more about surrender. Mark cleared his throat. I didn't know how far it had gone, he said finally. I should have paid more attention. Eleanor nodded once. Yes, you should have. There was no rage in her voice, just a clean, unflinching finality. Jane's mask cracked. So that's it, you're selling the house, and cutting us out. I'm selling the house, Eleanor said. What you do with the rest is your choice. Jane blinked. You'll regret this. I already regret staying quiet for so long, Eleanor replied. Mark looked like he wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Instead, he nodded once, his hand tightening around Jane's elbow, as if guiding her away before she made it worse. Goodbye, Mom, he said quietly. Eleanor stepped back inside and closed the door behind them, not abruptly, but completely. She didn't press her ear to the wood. She didn't follow them with her eyes through the window. Instead, she walked back to the counter, picked up the sealed envelope, and placed it beside the teacup she'd set out earlier. The kettle clicked behind her. Ready, she poured herself a cup, added a splash of cream and stirred. Then she walked outside to the front steps, envelope in one hand, mug in the other, and sat. No performance, no need for witnesses. The wind moved through the hedges like it had somewhere to be. She sipped her tea and looked up at the gray-blue sky. The front door stayed closed. The envelope stayed sealed. But inside her, the door that mattered had already swung open. And for the first time she didn't need anyone else to walk through it. The house sold, and I took the first steps toward my new life. Eleanor stood beside the front window, as the moving van pulled away, its taillights blinking down the tree-lined street. The house, her house, was empty now, but not hollow. She had already taken the weight with her, tucked into folders and bank transfers, and a life reset. Dana had called that morning with confirmation funds had cleared. The deed had transferred. The house at 3119 Rosewood Lane was no longer hers. Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She stepped back from the window, and let the silence settle like fresh snow. The check had been split between two accounts. One high interest, long term. The other liquid, immediate. Lorraine had walked her through the logistics, with the gentle assertiveness of someone who believed in her future, more than Eleanor had been taught to believe in it herself. She had called the bank first, then the travel agent. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor had a folder with flight itineraries, hotel confirmations and brochures printed in languages she had never heard aloud but longed to try out loud. Florence, Quebec. Santa Fe? Solo travel doesn't mean you're alone, Lorraine had told her, handing over the documents. It means no one gets to derail your joy. Eleanor smiled now, thinking of that line, as she unwrapped a ceramic mug she'd kept from the old house. One of Tom's a Father's Day gift the boys had made when they were young, cracked slightly at the handle, but still intact. She placed it on the kitchen shelf of her temporary rental and looked around. Smaller. Cozier. No echo. Just enough room for one woman and the life she was finally choosing. That evening, she sat at the round table with her laptop open and her calendar spread before her. She had signed up for a writing course, ordered supplies for a watercolor kit, booked a long overdue massage. She didn't ask anyone's opinion, didn't double-check with anyone's schedule. The house had sold, yes, but what she had bought instead was airspace time unspoken for. Thanksgiving came and went. She spent it at a B&B in Maine, sipping cider near a stone fireplace and reading novels no one else would interrupt. No turkey, no paper plates, just quiet. December settled in with a whisper. Lights blinking on strangers' porches. Music in coffee shops. She allowed herself small indulgences, cashmere socks, scented lotion, handmade jam, and one day, walking through a bookstore, she picked up a postcard and wrote a message to herself. You're not rebuilding, you're building, love Eleanor. She tucked it into her journal without mailing it. The closing day had been clean and uneventful. The buyer, a preservation-minded investor named Helena, had shaken Eleanor's hand and said, "This house has stories in its bones. I won't erase them." It was the first time someone looked at Eleanor's life and didn't try to trim it down. Now, as she watched the winter light dip low across the backyard of her rental, Eleanor felt no grief, only calm. She had kept the swing, moved it to the new yard. It squeaked the same way in the wind. She liked that. She made a simple dinner, a single bowl, no table, no performance. When the dishes were done, she poured a glass of wine and walked back to her desk. Her email pinged, flight reminder for Florence. Boarding in 48 hours. She smiled. It wasn't escape, it was arrival. The phone rang. She almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved. Area code from a state she hadn't lived in since college. She hesitated, let it ring once more, then picked it up. Hello? The pause was brief, but unmistakable. Then a voice. Warm, uncertain, familiar. Eleanor? It's Tom's cousin. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I heard about the house. And something else. Eleanor blinked. What else? I think you should sit down. The line didn't go. It stayed open, pulsing gently in Eleanor's hand, something unexpected waiting on the other end, and for the first time in a long time, she was ready to hear it. He wanted to talk, but I no longer needed his permission. The voicemail was short. Mark's voice, tentative, muffled like he was calling from a parked car. Mom, if you're open to it, I'd like to talk, just the two of us. Coffee maybe. She didn't respond right away. She went for a walk first. The air was crisp, her scarf drawn snug under her chin. The trees were skeletal, the sidewalks quiet. When she came home, she made a cup of tea, finished folding laundry, and read a few pages of a travel guide on Florence. Then, finally she texted back, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bell's Cafe, public, neutral, 1 hour. She didn't add a heart. She didn't need to. Bell's was a converted train depot with a fireplace in the corner and shelves of mismatched mugs behind the counter. She chose a booth in the back, ordered a black coffee and nothing else. No cream, no sugar, no softening. Mark arrived 2 minutes late, looking older than she remembered, not aged, just drained. He sat across from her with a latte he barely touched. Thanks for coming, he said. Eleanor nodded, but said nothing. He exhaled. I want to start by saying I'm sorry. Really, I was wrong. I didn't realize how badly we'd handled everything until everything fell apart. Still, she said nothing. He ran a hand through his hair, like he was trying to clear a window that wouldn't wipe clean. She was always a planner. She doesn't do uncertainty well. She thought she was doing the right thing, even if it wasn't the right way. Eleanor's gaze held steady. Planning someone else's life without their consent isn't a kindness, she said. It's colonization. Mark flinched slightly. I think she thought you'd never take care of yourself. Eleanor raised her eyebrows. Because I was too busy taking care of everyone else. He looked down. My whole life, she said, voice even but not cold. I bent so others wouldn't break. I made room. I got smaller, quieter. So no one had to feel uncomfortable. And no one thanked me for it. They just expected more. Mark's throat moved as he swallowed. I'm not angry anymore, she added, but I'm not blind either. You stood by while she erased me. I know, he said. That's why I wanted to talk. She nodded once. Let the silence hold. Let him sit in it. He tried again. I'd like to stay in touch. Slowly. I understand if it's not what you want, but, his voice trailed off. I'm open to it, Eleanor said, but I don't need it. Mark looked up, startled by the simplicity. I love you, she added, but I've finally started loving myself too, and I won't sacrifice one for the other anymore. He nodded, lips tight, jaw clenched like he was holding back words he didn't have the right to say anymore. They sat in silence until the hour passed. She stood, smoothed her coat, and said, "Take care of yourself," and she meant it. She walked out before he could follow. Back at her rental, the wind had picked up. She changed into soft clothes, tied her hair back, and opened her laptop. Her travel countdown ticked closer. Florence, in 4 days. She started a new email draft, subject line, change of address notification, Italy edition, and felt a ripple of unexpected giddiness. Lorraine called just before dinner. I stopped by your mailbox. You got something strange. What kind of strange? Eleanor asked, pulling open the fridge. It's handwritten. Forward. No return address, but postmarked from Ohio. Eleanor's brows lifted. Ohio? Thought it might matter. Want me to drop it off? Yes, Eleanor said, setting the lettuce back down. Hunger forgotten. Please. 20 minutes later, Lorraine stood at the door, envelope in hand. The paper was thick. The name on the front in blocky, uneven lettering. No stamps, just a forwarding label slapped across the corner. Lorraine offered no commentary, just arched an eyebrow and passed it over. Eleanor turned it in her hands. Not Mark's writing. Not Jane's. Not Tom's either. She didn't open it yet. She stood there, envelope in one hand, leaning against the doorframe like she had all the time in the world, and maybe now she finally did. She slid her finger under the seal and slowly pulled it open, because whoever had written it had known where to find her, and that meant this wasn't just history catching up. It was something unfinished, finally arriving. Not all family is chosen, but not all chosen family betrays you either. The letter unfolded stiffly, its creases still sharp from the envelope. The handwriting was unfamiliar but elegant, each loop careful, each line deliberate. Dear Eleanor, I hope this finds you well, or at least freer than the last time I saw you. I know I'm probably the last person you expected to hear from, but I wanted to write, because silence can be another form of betrayal, and I've been silent too long. Eleanor paused, reading the signature at the bottom. Caroline Matthews, Jane's sister. The youngest. The quiet one at holidays. The one who always offered to help with dishes when no one else did. She kept reading. I've seen how Jane operates. Always needing control. Always spinning the story until it's hers to narrate. I love my sister, but I don't excuse her. What she did to you was wrong. I knew it. I didn't speak up. I'm sorry for that. I'm hosting a charity event in 2 weeks, a fundraiser for women in housing transition. It's not much, but it's something I care about. And, well, I'd like you to come, not because you owe me anything, but because maybe if you're willing, we can start over. The final line wasn't flowery, just firm. You deserved better. I see that now. I hope we can talk. Yours, Caroline. Eleanor folded the letter once, then again, the weight of it different than the others she'd received this year. Not a demand, not an explanation, a quiet, sincere offering. She set it on the counter, beside her mug. When Lorraine stopped by the next day, Eleanor handed her the letter. She's nothing like Jane, Eleanor said after Lorraine finished reading. No one with that many thank you notes written in full sentences ever is, Lorraine replied, then leaned back on the kitchen stool. Are you thinking of going? I'm thinking of how strange life is, Eleanor said. That someone from Jane's bloodline might be the one to say the words I needed all along. Lorraine sipped her coffee. Sometimes the apology doesn't come from the person who hurt you, but it still counts. Eleanor looked toward the window, where frost was webbing across the glass in delicate spiderwork. She said I deserved better. You did, Lorraine said. You still do. The night of the event, Eleanor dressed with no hesitation. A black wrap dress, deep red-lipped hair pinned softly at the nape. She didn't dress to impress. She dressed to arrive. The venue was a historic theater downtown, lit from the outside, with soft amber bulbs that gave everything a warm, nostalgic glow. Inside, the air buzzed with conversation and violin music. Eleanor checked her coat, nodded at a few strangers, and found her way into the main reception hall. Caroline was near the registration table, in a navy jumpsuit and silver heels, hugging volunteers and arranging table assignments with quiet, efficient charm. When she spotted Eleanor, she paused, then smiled, broad and genuine. Eleanor, she said, crossing the room with open arms but stopping just short, letting Eleanor choose. Eleanor offered a hand. You're braver in person than your sister ever was in print. Caroline chuckled. Fair. They spoke briefly, small talk first, then real words. Caroline didn't press. She just thanked her for coming, told her she looked radiant, and asked if she'd like to sit near the front or back. Middle, Eleanor said. I'm still practicing taking up space. An hour into the event, the room was full. Laughter drifted over the clink of forks against china, the occasional clapping rising between speech. Eleanor sat at a round table with 3 women she'd never met, 2 retired librarians and a school principal, who'd already invited her to book club. She didn't miss anyone. She didn't scan for Mark. She didn't think about the past. Until the energy shifted. She felt it before she saw it. The hush that wasn't really silence, just attention being pulled. A figure at the entrance, slim, polished, beige coat, too much perfume. Jane. Her eyes scanned the room, and stopped cold on Eleanor. Eleanor didn't flinch. She lifted her glass, took a slow sip, and held Jane's gaze, not with challenge, but with something far more dangerous, peace. She expected me to shrink. I didn't. Jane didn't move immediately. She lingered at the entrance, clutching her clutch like it might anchor her to the floor. She was dressed in soft grays, understated pearls, the look of a woman trying to appear gentler than her reputation, but her eyes gave her away, sharp, scanning, calculating. Eleanor didn't look away. Eventually Jane crossed the room in slow, careful steps. A path of tight smiles and avoided eye contact cleared for her, though no one rose to greet her. She stopped beside Eleanor's table. The women beside her, Miriam, the principal, and Donna, the librarian, instinctively stilled, sensing something tectonic passing through the room. Eleanor, Jane said softly. Jane, Eleanor replied, cool and even. Jane offered a thin smile. I didn't expect to see you here. That makes 2 of us, Eleanor said, sipping her wine without looking up again. Jane lingered, her fingers brushing the back of a nearby chair. She didn't sit. I read the letter Caroline sent you, she said. I didn't know she'd done that. Eleanor finally turned her head, just enough to meet Jane's gaze. She used her voice, something you never quite managed. Jane's lips pressed together. She nodded once, a practiced gesture of humility. I came to say I'm sorry, she said, for how everything happened. There was a beat of silence. Eleanor nodded. Apology noted. Jane blinked. That's it. Eleanor looked at her fully now. What else were you expecting? I thought you'd be angrier, or you wanted a fight. Eleanor's voice stayed low. A dramatic exchange, so you could leave feeling justified for however you still tell this story to yourself. Jane said nothing. I'm not angry anymore, Eleanor continued. But I'm also not offering comfort. You hurt me. You know that. And I think you know why. But I don't need you to get it anymore. I'm done shaping myself around your comprehension. Jane's mouth parted slightly, but no words came. I've moved on, Eleanor said simply. I hope you do too. Then she stood, graceful, steady, Not to storm out, not to make a scene, but to walk away with dignity Jane couldn't touch. Jane stepped back instinctively as Eleanor passed. Outside, the air was crisp with early spring. The event had spilled out onto the sidewalk. People smoking, chatting, waiting on Ubers. Lorraine was by the railing, sipping sparkling water from a stemmed glass, her coat slung over her shoulders. She turned when she saw Eleanor approach, eyes catching every unspoken thing written across her friend's face. "You did it," Lorraine said. Eleanor nodded, slow and sure. Did she grovel? No, Eleanor said. She staggered. They laughed softly. "Want to grab dessert?" Lorraine asked, linking her arm with Eleanor's. Eleanor looked up at the velvet sky, clear, starlit, not asking anything of her. "No," she said. "I want to go home, just sit in it for a while." Lorraine nodded, and they walked together to the car, shoes clicking in rhythm against the pavement. Weeks passed, Florence came and went, and Eleanor sent postcards, some to people who'd earned them, and one she kept for herself. She settled deeper into her new place, filled her windows with herbs, took a photography class, said yes to dinners she once would have declined. Spring unfolded, then summer crept in, thick with honeysuckle and possibility, until one day, a letter arrived. No envelope this time, just a folded card left by the mail slot, her name in careful handwriting. Inside, a note: "Mom, Jane and I separated a month ago. It's final now. No drama, no yelling, just truth that took too long to say aloud. I've been thinking a lot about family. Real family. You were always the real one. I'd like to rebuild, if you'll let me. No pressure, just hope." Mark. Eleanor read it twice, then once more. Not with tears, not with triumph, just stillness, like the ground finally deciding it didn't need to shake to feel alive. She set the letter down on her kitchen counter, poured herself a glass of water, and stared out at her blooming herb garden, because sometimes the door doesn't have to swing open. Sometimes, you just leave it unlocked, and see who steps through. They gave me a paper plate. I built a new table. The smell of rosemary and browned butter floated through the small kitchen, warm and grounding. Eleanor moved through her home with ease, barefoot, apron tied loose at the waist, music humming low from the vintage speaker by the window. The table had been set since noon, not for performance, not for approval, but because she wanted it to be beautiful. Real china, cloth napkins, the good silver that had once spent years boxed away, waiting for a permission that never came. She no longer waited. Outside, laughter drifted from the front yard, where Miriam and Donna were arranging folding chairs and greeting neighbors with mulled cider. Lorraine stood at the porch rail, head tilted back in a wide laugh, coat unbuttoned, despite the November chill. Eleanor carried out a tray of warm rolls. "I told you not to let them hover over the food table yet," she teased. They hovered. Lorraine grinned. "I'm only human." More friends arrived. Reuben from the bookstore, arms full of pumpkin tarts. The Gallagher sisters from next door, who brought a cranberry relish. No one ever ate, but everyone complimented. There was no seating chart, no timeline, just clinking glasses, and soft jazz, conversations overlapping like quilt squares. This was her Thanksgiving now, not out of rebellion, out of choice. Around 4, the doorbell rang. Eleanor wiped her hands, moved to the front door and opened it slowly. Mark stood there. No fanfare, no flourish, just a brown jacket, a shy smile and a foil-covered pie tin in his hands. "Apple," he said. "You used to say store-bought crust was a sin." Eleanor took the pie gently. "You remembered." "I remember more than you think." She stepped aside. Mark entered quietly, nodding at familiar faces who greeted him with casual warmth. No tension, no sharp glances, just space. He didn't hover near Eleanor. He moved through the room like someone trying to earn his presence, not assuming. The dinner bell wasn't a bell at all, just Lorraine clinking her glass with a fork. Everyone found seats in waves, plates passed hand to hand, seconds offered before first bites finished. Eleanor stood at the head of the table. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't wait for silence. She just began. "This is the first Thanksgiving I've hosted without obligation." A few chuckles, a few knowing nods. She smiled. "For a long time I thought I had to be small to be safe. That being quiet made me. But silence isn't always virtue. It's often just self-erasure with good manners." Someone murmured amen. Donna probably. This table wasn't handed to me, Eleanor continued. I built it, piece by piece, not out of spite, but out of truth. And everyone here, you've helped me see that I never needed permission to belong to my own life. She raised her glass, to reclaimed peace, to earned joy, and to real family, chosen, forged and here by heart, not history. Glasses lifted, clinks echoed. Mark met her eyes. He didn't cry, he didn't speak, but he nodded once, deeply, and that was enough. Dinner passed, in warmth and rhythm, stories traded, recipes swapped, music turning from jazz to soft soul as the sky dimmed and candlelight took over. Later Eleanor stood at the sink, rinsing dishes beside Lorraine. The window steamed with breath and heat. Remember the first Thanksgiving I crashed? Lorraine asked. You barely looked at me. You brought boxed stuffing, Eleanor said, smiling. You burned the turkey. They laughed. Across the room, Mark dried glasses. He was slower now, more deliberate, like someone learning how to be present without needing applause. Eleanor opened a cabinet and pulled out the last 2 teacups from her mother's china set. Fine porcelain with blue-painted rim. I saved these, she said softly, for when I finally got served something real. She filled both with tea, handed one to Lorraine, and looked out at the full room, the glowing faces, the unspoken gratitude. The doorbell rang again. She frowned gently. Everyone she'd invited was already here. She walked to the door, heart steady, breath easy, and when she opened it, she smiled, because whoever it was, they weren't here for the old Eleanor. They were stepping into the world she had built. The camera pans back. Eleanor's small house glows with laughter and candlelight. The table, rich with food and faces, is full but never crowded. No one speaks over her. No one dims her. This time she sits at the center and she stays there.